A magic lantern was a device in which entertained the uneducated mass. It was a projection device that, with using light and a blank screen, would project images that were early on hand-printed on, or were even, later on, which in turn helped the photographic process, printed onto a glass sheet, which was helped by the invention of copper plates. This allowed more mass production of other slides, and more stories via images were created. These were fed through the magic lantern. The magic lantern applied to all classes and provided entertainment for a large mass of people, especially for those of the lower class. This added more escapism and allowed them respite from some of the everyday troubles that they had to deal with. Magic lanterns were invented by the 17th century, though they did not know of the actual date or the actual creator in which a magic lantern was first invented. But through time it was still maintained being one of the main image projector users, and is still popular in countries that are generally poverty-stricken, such as Africa. But a magic lantern was exceedingly popular with the Victorian period, as the earliest films were produced in the 1890s. It was seen as a huge step in the film industry then. The magic lantern provided them with a large amount of visual stimulation, as it was not just still images using a lever on the side. Of a more advanced magic lantern could swap the slides, moving them up and down to show movement in the image. Similarly, there is a motion where you can insert another slide, which mirrors the idea of movement. On the other hand, many used more than one magic lantern, which would combine into one projected images, all taking part in creating a movement aspect in an image. This all combined to creating more of a stimulating experience for those in the public who viewed it. Charles Dickens was a large advocate in the way of the magic lantern, using them amongst his work. He, when giving public speeches, would include the magic lantern, so for chapters of his work there would be art being projected onto the wall to set the scene for the audience, to draw them in and create their image in their head. For the time, Charles Dickens was very diverse in ways that the public found it. The thaumatrope was a toy in which was extremely popular in the 19th century. It translates to Wonder Turner. It was created by John Ayton Paris, though this is debated as to whether he was the true creator of the thaumatrope. John was thought to use it at the Royal College of Physicians in 1824. He did this to demonstrate the idea of persistence of vision, as he does leave credit for the astronomer John Herschel and the geologist William Henry Fitton for this invention. It's a circular cutout, generally made out of card, that has two pieces of string attached to each side, with a ring on either side. Using this persistence of vision, it allows the audience of the thaumatrope to blend together. Stereotypical thaumatropes are a bird on one side and a cage on the other, or flowers on one side and on the other a vase. This is one of the simpler devices through history, which was accessible to most classes within the era. The zoetrope was invented in the 1800s, this being a main point in time when people experimented with moving pictures, by William Horner, though it appeared at a different time in various countries. For instance, in England it appeared in 1834, but in America it was shown in 1870. It was one of several picture creation devices of its time. The zoetrope, to many, was known as the wheel of life, as pictures, when drawn printed templates, were placed on the drum of the device and spun. The pictures would come to life. The zoetrope was invented in 1834 by William Horner. It was originally called the Daedalus, the wheel of the devil, as it could project what was seen as evil images, then renamed by William F. Lincoln using Greek terminology. Zoo, meaning animal life, and trope, meaning turning. The zoetrope later on was defiantly seen in more of a positive light. The zoetrope was one of the more convenient motion picture devices, as it did not need a viewing mirror and it allowed more than one person to view at a time. For Horner's idea was forgotten until later in the 1800s. The zoetrope's work in that it used persistent motion to create the idea of motion in pictures. In the early eras of its existence, it used handcrafted drawings on circular templates, which fitted on the drum of the zoetrope. More recently, the pictures are printed, which allows people to see more of a variety in the pictures. Then once fitted, the zoetrope would be spun around, and when looking through slips that are placed above the pictures, the images would be seen to be moving. The faster it went, the more seamless the image became, but at the same time the slits would obstruct the view of the images, destroying the experience. When things such as the praxinoscope were invented, it showed more seamless motion pictures. Once the praxinoscope was created, which is similar to the zoetrope in the fact that it spins, but at the same time it was different as the images were not confined to slits. It had a mirror above the images which reflected them. This created more completely seamless viewing. The zoetrope became less frequently used. So as the motion images industry began to thrive, devices such as the zoetrope began to decline in popularity, especially when in 1895 modern cinema became prominent. The praxinoscope was invented by Frenchman Charles-Emile Reynaud in 1877. This invention is very similar to that of a zoetrope, but a large improvement on it, as it makes the viewing of images a lot more enjoyable for the audience. The praxinoscope changed the narrow slits, which made the audience's viewing more obstructed, and they couldn't really see the drawings, with mirrors around the inner circle of the praxinoscope, which reflects the images that are placed around the outer circle. This allows a clearer and more seamless view of the images in their motion. With this, the inventor, Charles-Emile Reynaud, created the theatre optique. With this, he improved the praxinoscope, which allowed him to be projected onto a screen, so this was seen as the earliest form of cinemas. He showed hand-drawn animations of cartoon, but soon, as Charles-Emile began, this was shadowed by the publicity and popularity that the Lumiere brothers got for their cameras and their actual creation of first-ever film. The praxinoscope was again quite a key device within this industry, as it started allowing more freedom within moving images and making them seem clearer. With the advance of using mirrors, makes it clear vision of movement. Motion picture. Edward James Muybridge was English-born who worked in photographic studies of motion pictures projection. As a young man, he immigrated to the United States and became a bookseller. He did return in England to pursue his dream of being a professional photographer, but then in 1867 he went back to America. This is where he hit his most productive era, and where he took a picture of Yosemite Valley that made him famous, as well as human-animal motion and a panorama of San Francisco, which made him famous and seen as a figurehead in the creative industries. His main contribution was when he worked at the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied in still images in which he created the overall image to seem as if it is motion. He mainly created this to prove the point that when a horse gallops sprints, at some point takes all its feet off the floor, which provides his hypothesis that actually horses do fly. The human eye in this experiment could not actually concur as to whether all the horse's leg left the ground around when galloping. Muybridge did look greatly into this. He had placed shutters in a long racetrack, so when horses crossed the trigger, linked to each of these shutters, it set in each of these cameras. He then copied these images onto a disc and viewed a zoopraxiscope. This was actually founded to be one of the first movie projectors ever made, which he invented. The zoopraxiscope was one of the things that was responsible for making Edward Muybridge famous among this industry. It was a device to show motion pictures. The zoopraxiscope projected images from rotating glass discs at an extreme speed, which allows the images to be completely clear. Edward's invention inspired many others to do with their inventions, such as Thomas Edison's kinetoscope. Edward Muybridge's study of animal and human motion were presented on these. For example, dog movements when running. Edward Muybridge in the development of the film industry helped greatly. Obviously, his work with motion greatly affected the industry, capturing the movement of animals and humans showed the intricate shots that were needed to create, and then his Supraxenoscope was the first ever movie projection. It allowed a wide range of people to view the same thing on a large screen, and then you do the same images clearly moving because of the extreme speed that the disc is spun at. The Lumiere brothers were most famously known for creating the first film ever. Auguste Lumiere, born 1862, is the oldest out of the two siblings, Louis being the youngest, born in 1864. Both were greatly technically minded, and both attended Le Martinter, which is known for being the largest technical school in Lyon, France. Both siblings worked for their father at his photographic firm, Auguste as a manager and Louis as a physicist. Louis created the dry plate process, which allowed them to create moving pictures. 1892, the brothers started to create moving pictures. In 1895, the Lumiere brothers made their own cinematographer, which helped capture the first film. This included the first ever, which is called Sortie de Lyon, which is of a woman walking to work. It only lasted for 50 seconds. They also created color photography called Autochrome Lumiere in 1893, and they launched to the wider market in 1907. A camera, Autochromo Lumiere, would have been the bare glass side facing the lens, which allowed light to seep through a mosaic filter before it reacted to the emulsion. Even through all of this, the Lumiere brothers still maintained their thoughts that cinema was an invention without a future. The first ever film edited by Edwin Porter. He was an American filmmaker, and he was employed by Thomas Edison in 1899. He was given the control over the New York studio. Before working for Thomas, he worked for a touring projectionist. This can be seen as igniting his want to experiment with filming and editing. Porter would travel between towns and cities for his previous job. He would set up a cinema in village halls and church to display to people. This experience is what Porter was pushed by. He learned what the audience wanted, and that allowed him to try and create the first ever edited film. The first film that he was using editing was one of Edwin Porter's, The Life of an American Fireman, in 1904. The first film that used editing was one of Edwin Porter's, The Life of an American Fireman, in 1904. It was about a fireman rescuing a woman from a burning building. He used editing to show the different perspectives of both the woman and the fireman.